So I think that that was a different perspective on the Queen Mother, is how a younger person like Diana, who was married to her favourite grandson, felt.
But also, another woman that found her quite irritating a lot of the time would be your friend of mine, Wallis Simpson.
Oh, irritating is an interesting word. I mean, I'm listening to Ingrid describe her as an Edwardian and old-fashioned, and of course I see her through Wallis's eyes. And Wallis was modern, although Wallis 4 years older, but for Wallis everything was chic and slim and modernity, and she almost positioned herself against somebody like Elizabeth, who was Queen. You look at her and you think, oh, here's a sort of soft, comfortable cushion, I'll sink into this. And it was quite the reverse. And so really Wallis and Elizabeth set themselves up against each other. They were both humorous, but in very different ways. You know, Wallis was smart and clever and had a dry sense of humour and very spirited, and that, of course, is what Edward loved, because this lack of deference, and for Elizabeth, deference and duty and responsibility and church, all those old-fashioned virtues, which meant nothing to Wallis. So they were just polar opposites.
And yet, at one point, both vying for his affections, according to him. According to Edward.
Yeah, according to him, which is also one.
Elizabeth also had a twinkle and a soft spot for him. Not so much his brother, Bertie, who she went on to marry. Would that not have irritated Wallis, or was she a little bit too chic for that?
Yes, no, I don't think that irritated Wallis. I think Wallis would have been rather pleased that she was the one who actually bagged him in the end. But I don't think that was what informed their rivalry. I think Elizabeth just described her as the lowest of the low. She felt she wasn't good enough to marry into the royal family, that she was brash, that she was common. That's not true, of course. In Baltimore society, where she came from, she was well-to-do, patrician, elite. The problem was she had no money, so she was an outsider.
And she had a couple of husbands under her belt.
Yes, well, she had one husband who was very current at the time, and one who she'd jettisoned. But I think Wallis was also informed by her childhood. She was insecure, and she was greedy for security and for money. And that came across as brashness, and it was that brashness that really, for the royal family, was absolutely taboo.
Which is juxtaposed to Elizabeth and her standing with the royal family. Queen Mary took an instant shine to Elizabeth and thought, this is the woman that should be married to my son. She very quickly identified her as a good match. But I don't think Elizabeth shared that same comfort within the royal family during that early courtship. She felt like a fish out of water at times, Ingrid.
Yes, I mean, Elizabeth was a very, very confident young woman, and she came from a very, very large and grand Scottish family, and she was quite independent, and she didn't want the trappings of royalty. She wasn't remotely interested. She was grand in her own right, and she had freedom, and she could do what she wanted, and she did actually fall in love. And I can't remember his name, Gareth. Who did she fall in love with?
James Stewart.
James Stewart, that's correct.
Now, you can understand why. I mean, he's a very, very dashing guy.
Yeah.
Kind of like if you were to look at it in today's terms, here he is here. He was kind of, you know...
David Nivenish, isn't he?
Yeah. Yes, he is, but...
He was an equerry to Bertie. He was
yeah,
so he was one of the... I can't remember Queen Camilla's dishy equerry, but it was that kind of...
a bit like Margaret with...
Townsend.
Peter Townsend,
Peter Townsend. So she had, you know, she came over all kind of whoo in his presence. Meanwhile, Mary's going, I don't think so. Have you met my son, Bertie?
Yes, well,
exactly. And Bertie wasn't quite the catch then, was he? He was a nervous young man. He stammered and he drank too much, in her opinion.
Yeah, she really... I mean, she sort of took to being a debutante like a duck to water and was having a fabulous time, and everyone was falling in love with her. And I think it was Barbara Cartland said it was really quite bad form. If someone didn't propose to you at lunch, you declined at dinner, and they threatened to shoot themselves at supper. And if they didn't threaten suicide, it was just rude. Then everyone was friends again the next day. It was just an endless cycle of proposals. And
oh my goodness, that's like speed dating before it was
In your book, Gareth, it's a lovely story about how when he proposed to Elizabeth the second time, and she said no the second time, and she wrote an absolutely charming letter for him saying, "Oh, I do hope we'll still be friends." And then they were sort of, as you said, they were having sort of supper together.
Yeah, they were going to Claridge's for dances, and it was all very civilised. But she did fall in love with James Stewart, and there's always this element with, and he was from another grand Scottish family, but there's always a sense where we, I think, overly romanticise the one that got away. You know, James Stewart, such a wonderful chap.
Well, I mean, without wrapping it in Bridgerton tones here, initially, Elizabeth met with Captain James Stewart.
Yes.
Well, first of all, in 1920, she attended a ball at the Grosvenor Square townhouse, which belonged to Lord Farquhar. So, you know, she's mixing in some pretty heady circles. And it was there that Bertie, who was the Duke of York at the time, first saw her and was taken with her.
Yes.
Initially, she had danced with Captain James Stewart, the son of the Earl of Moray, who was part of the army in World War I. So he had that, you know, he'd served, he'd seen action, and Elizabeth thought he was dazzling, absolutely dazzling.
And everyone did. I mean, he was really the catch of the season. Everyone thought, as you say, that he was really charming.
Right. So then, how did Bertie usurp him for her attentions when she really wasn't that interested?
So Bertie was helped by the juggernaut that was his mother, and also by some pretty dodgy steering from Captain Stewart himself.
And Lady Strathmore as well.
Yes.
Elizabeth's mum helped as well.
Yeah,
didn't
she liked Bertie. She was ambitious for her daughter. And
but at the time, Bertie would never have was not due to be king.
No, and I actually think that probably was a selling point. She would be a member of the royal family, but Queen was a much bigger responsibility. But Captain Stewart ended up having a dalliance with one of Elizabeth's fellow debutantes that she found out about and was quite upset. And her name was Mary, but everyone called her Midnight Mole because she was quite fast. And Elizabeth was not fast, and was the only thing Elizabeth was fast at was taking a grudge and holding
It's a wonderful old-fashioned expression, fast.
Yeah, she was.
I mean, fast and loose, yeah.
Fast and loose, and Elizabeth was very... But Queen Mary then also decided that enough was enough. And she stepped in and she said to Captain Stewart, you know...
She appeared at Glamis, didn't she?
She did. She turned up at Glamis.
Get Lady Strathmore on her side.
Yep.
So she recruited the mother first. This was tactical, right?
Yes.
So then she sent... Yes, so she had Glamis. So she'd one country house weekend in the north, and then she went down to the Astors at Hever because she found out Elizabeth was coming the next weekend. So she made sure her ladies-in-waiting were there, the Duchess of Devonshire, just to talk Bertie up. And at the same time, she got a lady-in-waiting's brother, who owned an Oklahoma oil field, to give Captain Stewart a job. And he was halfway across the Atlantic to New York before he realised what he said that bitch Queen Mary has done.
But all these marriages that you're talking about...
So Bridgerton!
are well-to-do marriages, but without the actual responsibility.
Yes.
And that was OK.